Hey guys, this is actually the second time I recorded Sunday's Art Soundoff. The first I had some internet and phone issues and it didn't get uploaded and then it got deleted. So this is take two of where you're from. So behind me is the house I grew up in from the age of 12 until I was 24. It is in a small suburban cul-de-sac in one of the nicer neighborhoods in St. Charles Parish. For my own protection, I'm just not going to give you guys that information. But those of you from the area probably recognize where I'm from, or I guess you guys know me, so you know where I'm from. But it is a very quiet street. There are, let me see if I can, no sidewalks. Middle of nowhere, takes 20 minutes to drive anywhere, takes multiple hours to walk anywhere. I had labored under the delusion that there was no public transit in the area. I was wrong. You can call St. Charles Parish Transit and they will come pick you up, but it may take them a really long time to get there, and it costs $2, but they will bring you anywhere within St. Charles Parish. So I'm gonna head on inside and we'll resume this. I just wanted to give you guys a shot of the house I grew up on. And this is the room I grew up in, again, from the age of 12 to 24. It is on the second floor of the house. It is one of the larger bedrooms, and it is a mess, so I don't really want to show you guys it. But you guys can see some of my art and posters and other wall decor from when I was a young artist or a teenager. Sorry about the shaky cam. And sorry, I'm out of shape, trying to catch my breath. So the topic for this sort of makeup art sound off is where you're from. Like I said earlier, I am from a small town in southeastern Louisiana, Luling. It is 40 minutes south of New Orleans. I'm actually not from New Orleans. I do tell people I'm from New Orleans, mostly because they've never ever heard of Luling and they wouldn't know what I'm talking about. So I go for the town that most people are familiar with. When I am out of Louisiana and people hear that I'm from Louisiana, their usual expectations is that I will talk like a Cajun. Not Cajun at all, Creole. They expect that I will be stupid. So that's always super fun. And I guess they're just surprised that I left the native nest. And it isn't unusual for intelligent young people to leave southeastern Louisiana. There aren't necessarily a lot of opportunities if you're in the creative fields. And it's not really the sort of stuff that is encouraged outside of a very limited academic setting, or the sort of stuff that's honestly very promoted down here. So I know a lot of young people who had to leave because there just wasn't anything for them here other than their families, and that's not going to pay their bills. So I went to A.A. Sanji, Mimosa, Lakewood, J.B. Martin, Hahnville. Then I went to the University of New Orleans for a degree in hypermedia, which is digital media. And then I moved to Savannah to get my master's degree, an MFA in sequential art at SCAD, but I've talked to you guys about that. And then I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where I am right now. I don't foresee myself staying in Nashville. Nashville's great. They do have a vibrant art scene that absolutely does not include comics or the illustrative arts. And I really dream of finding a place where I feel like I belong. I never felt like I belonged in Luling. My family has been in the area for about 200 years, but you know, talking to family members, we've always felt like outsiders here, which is kind of interesting. You can be from somewhere, you can have deep roots. I'm related to more than half the town, but you can still never feel like it was home, or never feel like you fit in, or never feel welcome, or never feel like you belong. Luling is definitely one of those places where I just never feel like I belong here. I've talked to numerous local businesses that say they sell local stuff, they say they want to promote local stuff, about carrying copies of Kara, which is set in Hahnville, which is part of St. Charles Parish. Hahnville is actually where my mom grew up, and the house where 7-inch Kara is set is the house my grandfather designed. He was sort of a hobbyist architect and he designed several of the buildings in this area. But you know, just because they say they sell local doesn't make it so. You go inside and you see it's all stuff from China. You recognize it as stuff from AliExpress, and you're like, okay, I see you sell local, sure, for $40. Gotcha. So, you know, trying to juggle living elsewhere, because you're kind of seen as a traitor. If you move out, you're seen as like not being from here anymore, even if you've spent almost all of your life in this area. Trying to juggle that and living in a town where I can do things and I have friends and stuff, but I still don't really feel like I belong, and I still don't necessarily feel like I have a group of comic people that I can click with. You know, it definitely contributes to like these intense feelings of depression and loneliness and just not having a place. And I know a lot of you guys, this take is not nearly as good as the one that was lost. Isn't that how that goes? The reason I'm telling you guys all of this, and I'm being really candid about this, and I'm even opening up and showing you guys the room I grew up in, is that I know a lot of you who are attaining your art education via YouTube because you don't have access to it elsewhere, like me. I did not. You are from small towns. You do not live in major cities where you might have access to nicer things, or you might have access to comic collections, or you might have access to interesting novel ideas and interesting novel people. You may feel discouraged because you may feel like you're never going to be able to leave. You definitely can leave. I left on the wings of education. Louisiana used to do, I don't know that they do it so much anymore. They used to have a scholarship program called TOPS. It was put forth by the Taylor oil company. My dad actually ended up working for them after I was in undergrad on my top scholarship. But my mom pushed me really hard. She was a bit of a type A parent. To always do your best, but doing your best meant getting straight A's to her for me. And I was in honors and I was in gifted, and I hated it, honestly. I didn't really like most of the people I was in classes with, and I hated it. It was twice as much work for half the grade. But I really wanted to get out of Louisiana, and I knew the way I could do that is by getting a good education and then using that to propel myself out, which is why I'm so insulted when people assume that because I'm from Louisiana, I would be less intelligent than they are. It's like, are you kidding? I spent my entire childhood reading and dreaming and thinking everyone else was going to be smarter than me and preparing for the day that I got out. You must be joking. Like, but you know, I feel bad because like this is the second take and it's not nearly as well, and it's not going nearly as well, and it's not gelling the way it gelled the first time, and I'm kind of regretting that that got eaten. Luling is definitely a cell dead zone, and the internet here is really terrible as well. So my uploads that would take 10 minutes in Nashville are taking 6 hours here, and YouTube never finished processing the video. It just gave up. So I'm hoping this probably much shorter video will be much better. But as you guys can see, when I was 14, I didn't really draw with any particular prowess. I just did it. I just did it in abundance. And I wish I could show you guys some of those sketchbooks. I think they're all in Nashville. I think I brought them with me, which is why I think it's really funny when people just trash them and they haven't scanned them, they haven't digitized them at all, they just trash them, because it's like, I understand they're trying to clean up space, but it's like they're ashamed of where they were from and they don't want people to know where they started. And I love seeing people's baby art. It's usually better than my baby art was. I was not particularly proficient, as you guys can see, but I was ambitious and I was ardent, and I didn't have, I had been tested for talented art on several occasions and I never made the cut. And my younger brother did. But, so my art education access was very limited. I had Miss Kiesman from 4th to 6th grade, and she was great. And then I had Mr. Bumgarner in 7th and 8th grade, and he was also great, but they were also art teachers who were also actual artists who did make things in their own time, who cared deeply about art and progression. And I could tell that for Mr. Bumgarner, teaching art was very frustrating because it's middle school kids and a lot of them were only taking art to get out of another elective. They didn't care at all. But we got along really well because even though at that time I didn't know I wanted to be a professional artist, I really enjoyed it. And he also knew my mom and would always give me like a super hard time. So I think I was also like working hard to get him off my back, right? But in high school, I had zero access to art education. There were two art tracks you could be on. There was regular art, and then there was talented art, and I was not, that talented art was just not an option for me. It was not offered to me. It wasn't on my plate. You couldn't test into that at that point. And there was also regular art and AP art, which were taught by, I think she's still there, Miss Goff. And she really took a disliking to me. She was teaching a bunch of my friends, and I think I left a really bad impression somehow. And she wouldn't, the school allowed you to test in, but she was basically like, nope, I'm not even going to administer the test. You're just going to fail it. You really need to know art history. She just made like a bunch of assumptions about me without knowing me. And so I wasn't able to take that test. So I didn't take any art in high school, which is funny because I'm a professional artist now. Oh, I've taken loads of art history since then. So if you're also in the position where you have teachers who think they know your ability and they think it's not going to go very far, as long as you are passionate and driven and always seeking to improve yourself, open to criticism, open to adjustment, open to putting in the time and practicing and learning, then they don't know anything about you, really. The only way they can say with any certainty that you're not going to make it is if you're lazy and you make excuses. And then they're right. You're probably not going to make it. But if you're driven and you're passionate and you are fierce and you don't allow them to dictate how you feel about yourself, you can go far. So I'm sharing that not as revenge against this woman I've met like twice, but rather just like, hey, that's something that had happened to me. It really got me down when I was younger. A lot of my friends who were taking her classes like would throw that in my face whenever they could, like, oh, you think you're so wonderful, you think you're so special, haha. Look, y'all, I just wanted to skip the first art class. Like, that's all I wanted to do. I was a senior in high school. I wanted to take art 2 instead of art 1 because art 1 is glorified construction paper and crayons, and I just wanted to not have to do that in my last year. I didn't want to have to be in a class with a bunch of 14-year-olds when I was turning 19. And so maybe ego has always been a problem of mine, but it just really felt like a waste of time, especially since at that point in time I was doing my senior project on comics and I was drawing a comic, and I'd been drawing comics for years, and I'd been educating myself with the internet. Like we talked about the J. Dillon tutorials a few episodes ago. I was educating myself and I was practicing, and I kept sketchbooks and I drew every day and I drew from life. I was doing all these things, and she never saw any of those things before she decided that I was just not going to be capable of keeping up with her Art 2 class as a senior in high school. So I try to keep that memory in my mind when I'm teaching, and I try not to ever prejudge other people. The only time I will prejudge and a young artist is if they are lazy, like they brag about being lazy, they brag about shortcuts, or that's usually pretty much it. Oh, just completely unwilling to think about things in a different way, completely unwilling to even discuss the possibility of it. Because unless you can change that way of thinking, you're never going to get anywhere, you're not going to learn anything, nothing's going to stick. You wouldn't believe how many truly talented people I've known growing up who became really stubborn and they never improved, and then they quit because things got hard, or because people just didn't want to work with them because their attitude was all wrong. So that's, when I'm educating others, that's the only time, and I'll usually keep that opinion to myself unless I think telling them something will maybe turn them around and help them make some better decisions. Like when I was TAing at Garrison, I had this 8th grader, and she was a huge brat. She was super rude to me, very condescending. She hadn't seen any of my work, even though I did show the class my work. She was like actively drawing anime characters in her binder, which is fine, because to be honest, that was me in 8th grade too. Like I don't get to judge her, but that was where she was. And I was trying to teach them art, like anatomy for comic artists, and she just completely blew me off. So I really didn't like dealing with her a whole lot, but I was leading the after-school tutorials to help these kids test into the art high school, and her mom wanted her to take it. And figure drawing is one of her big shortcomings, because she's one of those kids who thought if you had an anime style, you didn't need to know anatomy. And I finally sat down with her one-on-one, and I showed her you know, my modified Glenville Pooh Andrew Lewis method, and we broke down her characters and drew them like that, and it like started to click, and you could see that. And she finally saw how I drew, and she was like, well, why didn't you tell me? And it's like, because I tried telling you the entire time that we were cut from the same cloth. You just didn't want to listen. You know, so even people who seem like they're really, really stubborn and they're never going to change and they're not going to improve, sometimes it just takes finding the right way to reach them. And if you live in a small town with limited access to art education and a library that doesn't carry any art education books like the St. Charles Parish Library on Lakewood, and doesn't have any comics and just doesn't offer any sort of extracurricular programming for kids who are interested in art, you know, if those sort of things are just not an option for you for whatever reason, you can still make something out of it. The internet is so much better than it was when I was your age. There are so many wonderful YouTube channels, so many wonderful blogs, so many wonderful websites that do classes. You know, you guys really have options that I didn't have. So there's no excuse for when you're my age, you better be twice as good as me. There's absolutely no excuse. You guys don't have any crutches. And if you live in a place where you have access to those things in person, you have even less of an excuse. But even now, like when I went to Noca's Fest, it was a little frustrating because they kind of just assume that a lot of people live in the New Orleans area. So you get a very homogenized view of comics. The sort of people who are tabling there all tend to fit like the young 20s hipster, very liberal mold. And I'm 30 now, but I still fit the sort of very liberal mold. But so I'm not much better. But you don't get the sort of diversity you would get if you were actively soliciting the GNO area instead of just the heart of downtown. If you were actively inviting, and I don't blame them because they have a really small they have a small staff. It's all volunteer. They're working really hard. This is not a slam at them. This is a frustration because you go to MechaCon, and MechaCon gets people from all over the state. MechaCon is the anime convention in New Orleans. It used to be in the Hilton Riverside, and I've done that for 6 years. And you get a huge spread of people, all ages, all types, all interests. And like, I have suggested cross-pollination between the two because I sell comics at MechaCon for years, and you know, the Noca's Fest are kind of like, yeah, I guess we could talk to them about getting a table, but MechaCon is like notoriously difficult to work with due to certain people. So I don't blame Noca's, I blame MechaCon for like only just now. Like this year was the first year they gave tables out to other conventions to promote their shows. And this is like their 20th anniversary or something like that. No, it has to be like their 15th. They're not 20, because I have been doing, and it can't even be that, maybe 10th. I've been doing AnimeCon since I was 15, and New Marais was before MechaCon, and that started when I was 14, and I'm 30 now, so they must be hitting like their 10th year or something like that. But I used to go to MechaCon before I was a tabling artist as a cosplayer, so I have a long history with them too, and it seems like anything I have a long history with, there's like a history where our personalities clash because I am a really strong-willed, stubborn person. I have a lot of education, so I often assume I know what's best. I also have a lot of experience. I've traveled all around the country doing cons. I've done probably by now about 100 anime cons. I'm friends with a lot of con organizers. I know a lot of people. So I feel like I have a lot to bring to the table and a lot to share, and it's very frustrating when I encounter people who feel like enough is good enough, or they're just not even open to listening at all because they feel like it's challenging their authority. And there are definitely people who are like that, especially here in Louisiana. There's a lot of people like that. Sometimes having education is seen as a really bad thing here. Mostly because it's like, oh, you're too big for your britches, you're not willing to put your time in, you're not willing to go through the trenches, you're not really willing to pay your dues, without actually getting to know the person you're talking about. And you know what, maybe that's just my bias from having grown up here. Like, maybe everywhere's like that, and I just think Louisiana's like that because I grew up here, I was in the thick of it, and I felt like I was drowning my whole childhood. Anyway, this is where I'm from. If you have any questions or if there's something specific you'd like to know, you can ask me and I might answer. We just talked yesterday about our private versus our public sphere. So like I said, there are certain things that I'm really not going to tell you guys about because I want to keep that distinction. But if it is something that I think will help or give you hope or inspiration, keep you going, give you motivation, I'm happy to share that. I may just answer you privately. And part of all of the bitter comes from, like, I really do love this place and I really want to come back and I want to help make it better. And that's part of the reason why I went off and got an education elsewhere, is so that I could come back and I could bring this back to people over here. That's why I always try to give away panels, volunteer to do them for free, because I know a lot of these kids will not be able to swing an education out of state. I mean, my parents, the only reason I could go to college was for TOPS. My parents are super big on not having any debt. They were very much, do not take out student loans. We're not going to co-sign anything for you. You need to get in on your own merit. You need to get in on a scholarship. And I understand that that's just completely out of a lot of people's realms. I was really lucky that Louisiana had TOPS, and I was very fortunate that I had a mother who pushed me so hard that I could get the highest top scholarship, so it paid for everything while I was in college. And there are definitely some hardships there, because I went to UNO right after Hurricane Katrina gutted the school. So there was a lot of problems. I'm not trying to make it sound like I lived this privileged life, but I am admitting that I was very lucky that my first 4 years of college were paid for by the state of Louisiana. And by the Taylor Foundation. And then my father passed away, and he left Devin and I some money, and I paid for SCAD with that. So I don't actually owe anybody any money. I'm one of those very rare artists, but I had to lose my father in order to afford that. And I would take my dad back any day. I'd give all of that up and have my dad back in a heartbeat. So don't even think that. But it's the way it panned out, and so that's how I was able to swing that. But I have a lot of friends who owe a lot of student debt, like $120K, because they went to SCAD. And that's like a whole different conversation with art school and whether it's worth it and what it promises and what it delivers. And one of the things that after I graduated with that MFA, right? An MFA in sequential art is a terminal degree. It means that I am qualified to teach K through 12, as long as it's not special ed, as well as undergrad classes in most illustration techniques, all sequential art techniques. Like, it is, my qualification is a certification. And one of the big shocking things is that nobody cares. Nobody cares, nobody cares, nobody cares, nobody cares. They won't look at my portfolio, nobody cares. That MFA means nothing, nobody cares. And that was heartbreaking. So now I've got this MFA that I mention it a lot because I care. That was something I wanted, that was something I pursued. I went to grad school. Sometimes my extended family forgets that I'm the first person in the family with a master's degree. But I did it. I did that. I wanted it, and I went out and got it. And one of these days, I'm gonna go and get a doctorate. I'm gonna have a PhD. I'm gonna have to switch over to art history. So I'm gonna have to go into art history for comics, which is fine. I've already kind of got a thesis that I've been working on. But that's not gonna happen for another 20 years, probably. But I'm gonna get that DR in front of my name, dang it. And then y'all are gonna have to call me Dr. Becca. Right? Goals, ambition. That's how you get out of crummy situations, is you have those dreams and you figure out how to pursue those dreams, and you work 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 and you work. I'm totally off tangent, but something that I find really frustrating is that there are so many channels that talk about the feel-good side of art. Just make art. Just doesn't matter if it looks good. Just make art. And I know I do that too because I want you guys to enjoy it. But there's a lot of struggle to making art as a professional, making a living as a professional, finding your way as a professional, that a lot of us aren't. I'll talk about my own experiences, but I don't want to tell you guys how to do it because I've had so many dead ends. I've tried so many things that didn't work. You know, I don't want you guys to make all my mistakes too because you think that's the way to do it. But I also don't want you to skip those things because just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean it's not going to work for you necessarily. You know, you're going to do things that I didn't do and vice versa. And yeah, I did the best, but the best I could do, but you're going to do the best that you can do, and maybe that'll be enough. So we are super duper off tangent. But I wanted you guys to know that growing up in a small, restrictive town with a lot of closed minds made me really hungry to meet people who were different. And it made me really eager to find a place where I felt like I belonged. And it made me make these sort of comics. I had the time. I mean, I lived in a place where no sidewalks, no playgrounds within walking distance. There's just nothing to do. I had all this time to just draw comics because I had nothing else, that and homework all day, every day. And since I was in honors, I was doing homework 8 hours a day from the time I got off of school until I passed out. So I would draw comics in class because even though I was in honors, by my junior year, I just quit caring. I hated it. I was done. Like, I was too polite to, like, I would never have, like, acted out a whole lot in class, but I was done. And my classmates were done. Like, we all had our own little escapes. We were done. We were tired of the school using us to make up for the fact that the football team could barely pass because our school needed a certain average, and we were the ones who brought that average up. Because I remember the principal getting on the intercom to yell at us about our test scores not being high enough to compensate for them. Well, I can't help that you're not providing your football team with the sort of resources they need to get the sort of education you should be providing them. Don't use us to camouflage for them. But that principal's long gone, thank goodness. In fact, the principal now is actually this teacher I really liked, Miss Abby. She was my my homeroom teacher my senior year. And we were doing senior project in her class, so I drew comics in her class, and she was great. So if you're at Hahnville now, you have Miss Abby, and she's fantastic. I had Miss Fuselier, and she was horrible. So you guys are super lucky because you have a really great principal who's actually a nice person and cares about people, or at least she cared about people when I was in her class, so I can only assume she's still a wonderful person. Anyway, this is where I'm from. These are my roots. I would love to come back home, but this year is really showing me that there may never be a comeback home for Becca Hilburn, at least as a comic person. I may have to really push the establishing a career online, which is something I've been doing anyway, but I may have to really push it even more and then come back when it doesn't matter where I live. But I really do love parts of Louisiana. I love parts of Louisiana culture. It's my roots. My family's been here forever. Joseph's family's been here forever. You know, we're dug in here. This is where we belong, and we'll have to come back at some point. But right now, people just don't care about anything that I do. So I have to go make a life elsewhere and then come back. So that was, I want to say, Art Soundoff 20, which the theme was roots. So I will see you guys in a few minutes because I got to record today's, which is about quiet versus noise. Bye.